Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Earrings Off. We want to invite you to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review. You can find us on Facebook at Earrings Off Podcast and on Instagram at The Earrings Off Podcast.
Welcome to Earrings Off. I'm Lou.
And I'm Teresa. Let's get started. Jim White is an author, coach, and founder of the Family Enrichment Academy. Jim has been married for 40 years and has 6 children, as well as 12 grandchildren. His background as a family enrichment coach and life experience provide a unique perspective on parenthood. His book, titled How to Be the Parent Your Teenager Needs You to Be, is his second book on parenting. Are you or someone you know raising a teenager and need some guidance on better understanding how to be there for them? Then listen to this enlightening chat Lou and I have with Jim.
Okay, we have with us today Jim White, and we are excited to welcome Jim to Earrings Off. Thanks so much, Jim, for being here with us today.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure.
Yeah. So, Jim, what are the key strategies you teach in your book? Tell us a little bit about your book.
So, the book, there's really 3 fundamental strategies or 3 areas that when I work with parents that I encourage them to think through. The first one is around their own mindset, and it's about how can they manage their mindset. And a practical example would be sometimes when your teen, for example, they come home, maybe they've got a bad test grade, let's say. It's easy for the parent to slip into a frustrated or disappointed or angry mindset, if you will, which is really kind of fear-based. Yeah. And when they react out of that or respond out of that anger, let's say, it tends to damage the relationship and doesn't move the situation forward. The alternative is to be in more of I like to call it a love-based mindset. And that allows them to see the situation differently. Maybe they have a little compassion for the teen and they just respond differently. So the first area of the book is all around that parent managing their own mindset and some strategies and techniques for doing that. Because that's really step one. If the parent's not in a good place, the relationship and their ability to work with the teen is not going to be very effective. So step one is the parent and managing themselves. The second step is all about building connection. One of the most common complaints I hear from parents with teenagers is they start to feel disconnected from their teenager. And in fact, that happens. And so the second sort of fundamental is all around strategies for building connection with that teen, both what I'll call preventative strategies, things that you do in an effort to build connection sort of ahead of time, but then also things you can do in the heat of the moment when maybe things aren't going that well to help build connection. And then the third area is once that connection's built is it's a strategies and some ideas and techniques around empowering your teenager. One of the fundamental messages I like to communicate to parents is as their child moves into those teen years, they have to make a transition from controlling what the child does to empowering the child to make better decisions or to do the right thing. And there's this transition from control to empowerment. And so the third sort of pillar, if you will, or fundamental is all about empowering the child and what are strategies and techniques you can use to be a source of empowerment for them. So those are the 3 fundamentals within the book that we talk through.
Okay. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty good. I needed that book when I had. So what are the most common issues you hear from parents?
So, which, we just mentioned one of them is that feeling of disconnect. That is one of the most common things.
Right.
There's a sense that there's a disconnect with the teenager, and it's how do I rebuild and become connected to them. And there's strategies, like I'll just share a couple of examples.
Okay.
For example, one of the strategies, which when I say it, a lot of times people say, oh, that's kind of interesting, is the idea of being playful. So the question is, can you be playful with your team? And if you find ways to be playful, that's a great way to build connection. An example might be you have a teenage son, go out in the driveway and play basketball. That's an example of being playful. Or maybe they like to game, so you step into their world and maybe play some video games with them. On the other hand, one I like to use from our family is my youngest child is a daughter who loves to sing and loves musicals, Broadway musicals. And so her and my wife will flip on Pandora, or they'll put on a soundtrack for Hamilton or one of the musicals, and they just start singing together. And they're not talking, they're not, it's not like they need to speak to each other. They're just being played and they're acting things out, and they're just enjoying that process of singing. And it's a playful moment, if you will, and it's a great way to build connection. So that's an example of one of those strategies to to build connection. Other things that you can do, the idea of being curious with your team, asking questions about what's going on in their life and giving them a chance to share what they're going through is, because everybody, you've heard the saying, everybody loves to be heard. You want to feel like somebody's listening to you. Well, your teenager's no different. And so if you can go into it and approach them from a curious mindset, and out of curiosity, that's a great way to build connection as well. So there's just, it's about being intentional and trying to build that connection so that you can reestablish that. And that will go a long way to having the teen be comfortable and opening up to you. Because that's really a lot of times what the complaint from the parent is, the teen won't talk to them.
Well, that's what I was just about to say, Jim. What do you do when the kid has just shut down and wants nothing to do with you? And full disclosure, that's what I went through. Okay. So what do you do in those instances? And I do realize when you talk about some of our responses being fear-based, that's absolutely where I was, because you're so fearful that you're going to lose this kid, or that this kid is going to take a path that they don't want and you don't want for them. So I was just frantic. And so I think that just sent both of us down the rabbit hole where he just shut down.
Yeah. And that's a great observation of yourself, being self-aware. And I would throw out that, we talked about the parent managing their own mindset. That's step number one. And I say that because you can't build connection if you're coming from a fearful perspective or a fear-based mindset. Think of it, I like to say, when you're fearful, everything you do and the way you act is going to be destructive. It's going to damage the relationship. When you're love-centered or love-based, everything you do will be healing. It will help to move things forward and heal the relationship. And so the first step before you can even think about building connection, you got to, as a parent, you got to kind of do some work on yourself. It's a matter of personal development at that point, and create some self-awareness. Where am I right now? I like to use, and you may have seen before, this idea, there's a stimulus, something happens, teen says something, they make a mistake, and then you have a response. And part of the strategy, that one of the things I'll share with people is, to try to create a pause between the stimulus and the response, because it's in that pause, if you can create a break, that's where you have an opportunity to make a choice. And you can choose to approach it in a different way. And so, one of the strategies is to start to become aware of, and I like to use the word experience, what is it that you typically experience that are signals to you that you're in a fearful place. For some people, it's anger. They just get mad. And so when they start to feel that anger come up, that's a sign that they can say, oh, wait a minute, I need to create a pause here. And then be intentional about shifting their mindset. For other people, it's frustration. Sometimes for people, it's apathy. They just get apathetic and they just sort of push it away. And so it's about being self-aware to what are your signals that indicate, oh, I'm going into this, I'm in a fearful place, or I'm operating from a fearful mindset, and then trying to create a shift. I'll give you 3 questions I use in the book, and it's sort of the heat of the moment questions. If you can create that pause, the 3 questions are, the first one is, who do I need to forgive in this situation? And again, the purpose of these questions is to shift you from being fearful to more love-based, from a fear-based mindset to love-based. So the first question is, who do I need to forgive? The second question is, what am I grateful for? What can I be grateful for in this situation? And then once you get through those two, then the final question is, how can I make a difference here? And so those three questions are a good way to shift that mindset and kind of have you think from a different perspective. It puts you into a different place, and allows you to build connection.
I do too.
I love those questions, Jim.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and back to your original question, a lot of the times the question is, how do I build connection? I can't get the teen to open up. Like you were saying, they just sort of shut down. They won't talk to me. That's a sign that they want connection, but they're not feeling it. And so that's the end goal, is to build that connection. But in order to do that, you got to make sure you as the parent are in a good place. Then you can work on some of these connection building strategies. And the other thing I like to throw out to parents is you have to be intentional about it. It's not just going to happen by accident. And so you have to make an effort to build connection and be very intentional about what you're doing and how you're doing it. And when you start to be intentional and think, okay, that's the goal, you'll be amazed at how many different opportunities pop up as a way to build connection. Can I share? Is it okay if I share something else? So like one of the things that when I talk about mindset for the parent, we talk about transitions. And what I mean by that is, if you think about your day, there are a series of transitions that happen throughout the day. One of those is when your child walks into the house coming home from school. That's a transition. And so one of the techniques is to set a trigger for yourself. So if your child always walks in at 4:00 in the afternoon, let's say, at 3:50, you stop and you sort of gather yourself and you say, you have this moment where you set your intention. How do I want that first 15 minutes with my child to go? Where do I want to connect with him? I want to be compassionate. I want to give him a chance to open up to me. You sort of set your mindset during that 10 minutes before they walk in intentionally, right? And so then when that transition happens and they come in, you're in a better place, rather than just sort of when they walk in, you're reacting because you're looking at your phone or whatever that you're doing. And again, that's an example of being intentional and being more purposeful about how you approach it.
Wow. Okay. So Jim, tell us about your background.
Sure. So I'll share a little story, and we talked briefly about it. So I have spent the last 40 years studying the topics of personal development, marriage, and parenting. But I like to say, more importantly, I spent those 40 years also applying the lessons that I was learning in my role and in my life as a husband and a parent. And we have 6 children. And when I tell this story and start to share it, I like to use the analogy of a hero's 2 journeys. And if your audience is not familiar with that, it's actually a storytelling technique. If you go to a movie or read a book, there's a hero or a main character that's within that book, and when you or the movie, and when you think about it, they are always trying to accomplish some task, or they have something they're trying to do. And that's the first journey, or what's known as the journey of accomplishment. There's something they're trying to accomplish. But what makes the story compelling is the second journey. And what that involves is that the hero is going through an internal transformation of some kind. They're discovering new principles, values, and beliefs, and things about themselves that in effect make them a better person, or make their life work better. And it's that second journey of fulfillment is what makes the story compelling. How that connects with me is that, we have 6 children. So as you can imagine, there was a lot of outside tasks for us to accomplish. There were meals to cook, there was homework to help with, places to be. I mean, I mentioned, we were 6 kids busy. I mean, there was stuff to do all the time. So there's all this outside task that we have to complete. And with that, we had a lot of obstacles that we had to overcome, just like every family does. We dealt with everything from a lost homework assignment to one of our children dealing with learning disabilities. And we had everything from a scraped knee or a cut on the elbow to one of our children struggling with drugs and alcohol. We learned to ride a bike, and we also crashed a bunch of cars along the way too,
Okay.
when you have those teenagers.
Right.
And as you can imagine, being married for 40 years, I mean, my wife have had our shares of ups and downs.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And in fact, when I thought back on it, we've had 3 distinct, what I call hurricanes. These were times where, it was a little bit touch and go of whether or not we would have stayed together, in all marriages. I mean, if you're going to be together 40 years, you're going to have.
Oh, yeah.
But the flip side, as I was doing all the stuff that a father of 6 children does, all that outside journey stuff, I was also experiencing this amazing internal transformation as well. And it was through my interest in personal development and family enrichment and parenting. I was learning and discovering new principles, values, and beliefs that just made our family work better, if you will. And actually, like 20 years ago, I started writing. That was when I really got kind of hooked on writing. And at that time, I put together a definition of a successful family. Think of it as like a vision statement for the family. And for, what I wrote was, the family is one that speaks with respect. They honor differences. They empower each other. They provide a nurturing environment. They have an ability to truly enjoy and appreciate the good times, but they also have the ability to effectively deal with any difficult issues that come their way. And then kind of my final sentence was, there's a sense of peace, joy, warmth, and love within the home. And so that was sort of like the ideal, it's the target that we're after. And while our family, we don't always look like that. As time went on, we do more often than not. And then the other piece of it is, when something happens that sort of knocks us off our game, if you will, or an issue comes up, I now feel really good about my ability to lead us back to that. And so that's the internal transformation that was going on. And where I find myself now is our youngest child is actually in college. She's 21 years old this year. And so it's like all of a sudden, several years back, I started to feel called to share this wisdom and these insights that I've gained over 40 years. And so I founded the Family Enrichment Academy as a vehicle to fulfill that calling. And the whole purpose is to share insights, wisdom, whether it's through the book. I've put together a book. We do courses, coaching, I'll use a variety of ways to try to help and communicate and support parents as they go through their journey as well. So that's sort of that's a 40-year journey in a 5-minute description, but it gives you a sense for the background that's there.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
Yeah, good stuff. So tell us about what makes your approach different.
So I think one of the big things is the focus on the parent's personal development. And in fact, I just mentioned that idea.
I like that too.
The idea of a hero's 2 journeys. And when I work with parents, that's front and center in our conversation, is that they're on 2 journeys as well. And they have stuff they have to accomplish with their family and, those outside tasks. But there's a tremendous opportunity for personal growth for them. And it's primarily, to be honest, it's around, I like to share it as all of us have within us 2 competing mindsets. We have a fearful mindset or a fearful perspective, and we have a love-based or loving perspective. And those are 2 competing mindsets that are inside all of us. And the question is, when life puts the squeeze on you and something happens, where are you coming from, or what do you naturally go to? And the personal development is all around personal awareness of where am I, and then the ability to shift and to choose. If you find yourself fearful, how can I choose to move to that love-based perspective? And that skill set sounds simple, but it's very difficult to do, and it's ongoing. And part of the journey aspect, especially with kids, every day you're going to be confronted with new issues and challenges because the child is growing. I mean, what a parent of a 5-year-old deals with is different than a parent of a 10-year-old. And when they become 15, there's a whole new set of it. And so it's always ever changing. And then you have family dynamics. You have a second child or a third child, or in our case, 6 children. But every time you add that personality, it changes the dynamic. And so it's just an ever evolving, ever changing environment. That's why it's a journey. And there's this opportunity for the parent to grow and develop and learn through that and become a better person and make their life work. But I mean, ultimately, the goal is for the parent to experience peace, joy, and happiness as well, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right, right.
And if they learn to do that, that puts them in a great position to teach their child how to do that as well.
Right.
And so back to your original question, I think one of the things that makes my approach a little bit different is it's really focused a lot on the parent and where they are and how they can evolve and grow as part of it, rather than just saying, do this, here's a technique, just do this. It's okay, how can I grow and develop as a person as well?
Right.
I was going to just say, so no more of the do as I say mentality, right?
Yeah, I think as they move into their teen years, the role needs to shift to more of an empowerment role. Because think of it this way, that teenager in just a few short years is going to be out on their own.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And so part of our role is to help get them ready to make their own choices and decisions. And we have to start thinking that way and turning over some of that responsibility when they're in their teen years, when they're still at home. It's safer, if you will, if they can learn that stuff. And if they have to make a mistake, do it while you're still around to help support them and help them recover from that. But it's a mindset shift to start to turn those things over. Actually, I tell parents that they need to resign as the manager of their teenager's life.
Oh,
So
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a way to look at it.
Yeah. You start turning that stuff over to them, a little bit at a time, and just continue to hand more and more over to them, and then work from more of a position of, how do I coach and support them and empower them? And when you start to take on that mindset, you start seeing opportunities, something pops up, and it, like a perfect example, let's say your 16-year-old son or daughter, it's time for them to have their next dentist appointment. When you come from an empowerment mindset, you say, hey, you know what, this is a great opportunity. They can set that up on their own. Right. So here's the number. You set it up, you figure it out. And then, you empower them, and they may be a little nervous about it, but again, it's good for them to go through that experience. It helps them to evolve as a person, for them to make that phone call and set that appointment and put it on their calendar, all of that kind of stuff. So you start to see and recognize opportunities all around you to start to hand stuff over to them along the way. And interestingly, we talk about connection. As you do that, the teen starts to sense that you believe in them, right? You are in support of them. You feel like they are a very capable person. And with that, they start to feel closer to the parent as a result of that. So that it's a way to build connection as well.
And I think probably in some of that, Jim, it also gives the teenager some insight into all the many responsibilities that the parent is managing. And that's a win also, because many times folks can they just sort of think, okay, this is what you do, not realizing that mom and dad also have a lot of things that they're trying to manage.
Right, exactly. And so it gives them some insight, and again, it positions them to be ready, because at some point they're going to have to do all that stuff on their own anyway.
Right, exactly.
Yes. So for me, I wish I had these tools with my daughter. She's now out on her own, but one thing she has realized is just what you were saying, though. She now realizes, because she has to make her own appointments, she has to do her own grocery shopping and her own cooking and planning and all of those things. And she's like, wow, you did a lot for me, Mom. So now she realizes it, because I wish I had known these tips before. My daughter's also 21, and she just got her first job out of college. And she's living in another state all by herself in her own apartment. And now she's having to do everything herself.
And then the teen, they want to, and actually a lot of times it can be a source of conflict, because that teenager wants to start to take over some of that stuff. And then they feel like the parent is still controlling, back to that controlling word. The parent won't let go of that. Now, it's not just like a dentist appointment, but it's things like, okay, I'm going to go out on Saturday night. I want to just, the teenager feels like they're able to make responsible decisions and go out and manage that evening. Where the parent sometimes says, I want to know everything you're doing, when you're doing it, what time they want to control the situation. And to be honest, when you think about that type of control is fear-based.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, I
Yeah.
mean, as a parent, we're afraid they're going to make
Yes.
a mistake.
Right,
And
right.
and to
It's
be honest, when they become teenagers, part of what drives that fear is the risk go up,
yeah.
right?
Right. Yeah,
It's,
exactly.
a crash of a car is a lot
Right.
worse than falling off their bike. I mean,
Exactly.
but
Yeah.
at the same time, it's, they have to go through that, and it's about empowering them, because you're not going to be there
That's
on
right.
Saturday
Right.
night when somebody
That's right.
hands them the beer or whatever,
That's right.
They've
or
got to make
encourages
those
them.
choices.
They
That's
have to,
Yeah.
they have to be
Yeah.
able to make that choice on their own.
Right.
And part of that is about empowerment. How do you sort of set them up? And here's an example of an empowerment question around that topic. For example, let's say you've got a teenager that's involved in some kind of extracurricular activity, whether it's sports or drama or whatever it might be. And most schools now have kind of like a zero tolerance policy, where if you get caught drinking, you're out, right? You're off the team or out. And so rather than saying to the teenager when they walk out, don't drink because you're going to get thrown out, it's more of a question, how would you feel, or what would you do if you got caught drinking and you couldn't play football, let's say? And you just leave that question with them. It's up to them, that they're going to have to make the choice, right? But you sort of present it more as a question and asking them how they would deal with it. Another one I love in those kind of scenarios, and it was like, well, have you thought about how you would pay for the attorney if you got caught drinking?
nice.
And a lot of times they'll say, well, wait a minute, you're not going to pay for the attorney? No, that's not that's your responsibility. It sort of opens, but you present it as a question rather than, to kind of dictate.
Don't do this. Right.
Them. Right. And it causes them to think and process, because they may not have thought of that.
Right.
So those are some examples. Empowerment coaching is all about asking great questions to them.
Okay. So, Jim, what were the most difficult issues you dealt with as a parent?
It's interesting. When I do these interviews, a lot of times I get asked that. And I think that the biggest challenge that we went through, and I mentioned we had one of our daughters that struggled with drugs and alcohol. It started in high school and continued into her college years. And, that's a great example, one of those things that it's hard not to get pulled into a fearful mindset, because it's dangerous, and you just, you start to worry about them, and, you want to be able to help them. And it was a challenge. It was just really a challenge for us to go through that. And there were times where, when I look back, I said, well, I could have maybe handled that a little differently, or could have approached it a little bit different. Sometimes you just feel like you don't know what to do in those kind of scenarios, because, again, it's up to them to make that choice. And one of the premises that I like to throw out to people is, if you can build that home environment that's full of, like we talked about, peace, joy, warmth, and love, what that becomes is a point of reference for your child. And so when they start to drift away from it, they notice, oh, wait a minute, that feels a lot different at home than it does here. And they start to say, I don't know if I like the way this feels over here. And it's like a magnet that pulls them back at the same time. And the same thing, a lot of times I'll have parents say to me, well, my daughter just came home with this new boyfriend. I don't like him. He's not good for her, all of that kind of stuff. Well, again, if you can create a really strong home environment that's full of peace, joy, warmth, and love, that becomes the reference point that they're going to use to compare that relationship to. And when that relationship starts to not feel that way, they will then be able to distinguish that and notice it. And it'll help them to make that decision. Okay, wait a minute, this doesn't feel right. And then if you think about on their own, they're able to decide, okay, this person may not be the best fit for me, rather than the parent telling them that. And if they can make that decision and start to distinguish the healthy relationships from the unhealthy relationships, that's a skill that will serve them for the rest of their life.
Absolutely.
When you think about it.
And
so, but it all starts with having that frame of reference, that home base, the more centered you can have your home, and the more full of peace, joy, warmth, and love that environment is, that becomes their point of reference and what they compare things to. So.
Wow. Okay.
Good stuff. If you could only give one piece of advice to a parent with a teenager, what would it be?
Well, it's, I'll frame it in a couple of ways. One is that and I like to share this with people, and when they hear it, they think, oh, that kind of makes sense. It is the idea that all bad or unwanted behavior, anything your teen does that's bad or unwanted behavior, the first thing that should come to your mind is that it's a call to connect. Your teenager is feeling disconnected, and as a result, bad thing, that, think of it this way: when they feel disconnected, they become fearful, and so they have this negative energy that's inside of them, and it has to get out somehow, and so it comes out as bad behavior. It could be that they fight a lot with you. It could be because they become apathetic at school. It could, there's just, if they're gravitating to the wrong people, kids that you feel like aren't the best influence on, all of that is a sign that they need to reconnect with you. And so the first step for the parent is to recognize, oh, this is a sign I need to really focus in and be more intentional about building connection. But then the big point to share with the parent is that then goes back to you, and are you developing and growing from the standpoint of being able to manage your mindset, whether you're fearful or whether you're love-based. And so that's, the real opportunity for parents is for them to get better. The more they can operate from a love-based mindset or a loving perspective, the better things are going to go. And that's really at the root of all of it. And so that's where you got to start. You got to start with yourself, and really working on your own personal development, and adopting the idea of a growth mindset. You can grow and learn and develop, and that's what makes hope possible. And there is always hope. You can always heal a relationship. I mean, love is amazing that way. If you can shift to a love-based mindset and start approaching things from a loving perspective, things will heal and they will get better and move forward, sometimes a lot faster than you might ever imagine they could. A little forgiveness goes a long way, and a little gratitude goes a long, long way, and some compassion, those kinds of things. So I think the one piece of advice I would give parents is to really work on themselves in that area of, okay, which mindset am I coming from, and how can I become more loving? And then sometimes I say love's always the answer, and parents will say, well, I do love my children. And I'm not saying they don't. There's love inside them, absolutely. But there's also fear inside them. And it's a matter of managing those two things, and being able to put it together.
That's pretty tough, though. Yeah. That's really hard.
Which, can I share I love this little story that you may find interesting. It was a story about a saint. It was a holy person, and he was within a crowd of people, and someone in the crowd asked them, if you're so holy and so full of love, do you have access to another kind of love or something that we don't know about? Can you share that with us? And the saint's response was, no, I don't have access to another kind of love. The love I have is just like the love you have. The difference between me and you is I don't have anything else inside of me.
Oh, wow.
There's no fear.
Right.
And that's what made him
right.
Yeah. Wow. That's the difference. But all of us, we're human, and we have both of those perspectives inside of us, and it's a constant battle. I mean, we deal with it all the time.
Well, and you're right, we're human, but this is very helpful, because the first thing we have to do is acknowledge that.
Absolutely.
And know that that's what we're dealing with. So then we can try to take steps to manage it, so that we can foster that connectedness.
Yeah.
So
it's self-awareness is critical.
Yeah.
You got to start to be aware of where are you.
Right.
And what pushes your buttons. I mean, we all have buttons that get pushed, right?
Right.
Things that happen.
Yeah.
So often, though, we see the teenagers as that behavior as typical teenager behavior, when they shut themselves in their rooms, when they yell at us when they come home from school or whatever. We see that, and we claim it as typical teenager behavior, rather than looking at it from the perspective that you've introduced us to, as a need to connect.
Yeah.
I feel that that's more that is what it is. When I can think back on situations and with my own children, it's that was a call to connect, right, versus typical teenager behavior.
Which, if you think about it, it makes perfect sense, because part of what the teenager is going through is they're starting to see themselves as separate and independent. And as they do that, they start to feel disconnected.
Yeah.
And they don't really know, they haven't matured enough, if you will, to understand that that's what's going on and be able to verbalize it and communicate it back. But that's what's happening, is that they're going through just a natural transition where they start to feel separate. And in some ways it's good, because they start to have their own opinions and thoughts and values and all that. But at the same time, they start to feel isolated and alone and disconnected. And it's just a natural process.
And I think maybe, Jim, part of that being disconnected is their own fear, because whether they will admit it or not, it gets to be scary as you're a teenager and realizing, hey, I'm going to be leaving here. I won't have this security. As much as I push it away, I know mom and dad are there. I know the routine here. This is very familiar. And a lot of time, what we're getting from them, they won't admit it as fear. And so I think when you have that, and when we misinterpret that as parents without the lens of love that you spoke with, I think that's when it gets to be so challenging. So
absolutely, it's a lot of fear on their their fear of being accepted and being good enough, being they have all of that stuff going on. And you said it perfectly. A lot of times they don't know how to verbalize it, or how to communicate it. And it's interesting, it'll come out, think of it this way: your son or daughter goes to school, their best friend sits at a different lunch table, something, simple like that. And so they then start to have this fear that, well, maybe I don't belong, I don't fit. They come home, what do? They pick a fight with their sibling. And so you see them picking a fight with their sibling and think, well, why are they fighting with them, when really it's not related to that at all. It's all about what happened at school. And somehow it has to come out. But again, as a parent, I say, well, view all of it as they need to reconnect. That's the issue, is they need to connect and feel safe again, if you will. It's a matter of building that safety and knowing that somebody loves them unconditionally. And while the parent will say that they do, the question is, does the teen feel that way? And they don't, and sometimes they don't. They feel disconnected. And so that's where the parent has to be intentional about rebuilding that connection.
And I love your point, Jim, about before your kid comes home, take 10 minutes to be very intentional about your initial interaction with them. That's powerful, because you're setting the tone for your time with them. So just thank you very much for being here with us today. Those are all of the questions that we have for you, but we want you to share, let our listeners know how they can get in touch with you, your website, any resources you care to share, because certainly you've got some great information and we want folks to be able to connect with you.
Absolutely. And I appreciate that. So the business is Family Enrichment Academy. And so the website is familyenrichmentacademy.com. And I'll share that link with you, and you can put it in the show notes if you guys do that. And then from a resource standpoint, as we've talked a few times, one of the biggest questions, how do I get my teen to open up and talk? How do I, have that relationship develop? And one of the simple ways is by asking better questions. And so I have a free resource, and what that is, it's 10 questions you should never ask your teenager. Premise being, these are the conversation killers. These are the ones that kind of shut them down. And then I've got, along with that, 10 great questions, the conversation starters, a way to get them to open up. And so again, it's a free resource. I like to make available for people. It's a way to kind of introduce them to the work that I'm doing here at the Family Enrichment Academy. And you can get that on the homepage at the website, but I'll also share a link that goes right to the page where they can get that and get it downloaded as well. So those are the best ways to connect with me, is through the website.
Well, again, thank you so much, Jim, for joining us today here on Earrings Off. It's been a delight to speak with you, and we wish you all the best. You take good care.
Thank you. I appreciate it very much. And thank you for having me.
Absolutely. All right. Bye-bye.